In the depths of the unknown, where shadows whisper and fear takes form, tonight I bring you The Boarded Window by Ambrose Bierce. Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, the place where classic horror and mystery come alive. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the shadows. In the year 1830, just beyond the edges of what would one day rise into the great city of Cincinnati, stretched a vast and almost endless forest. It was a land of shadows and silence, broken only by the scattered cabins of frontier settlers, restless wanderers who carved homes from the wilderness, only to abandon them as soon as comfort took root, forever chasing the horizon westward. Most had already vanished into remoter settlements, but one remained. He was among the first to arrive. And now he lived alone in a rough-hewn log house, swallowed on all sides by the brooding forest. The man himself seemed carved from the same silence. No one had ever seen him smile, nor waste a single word. His life was sustained by the barter of animal skins in the river town. The soil around his cabin lay untouched, save for a few acres once cleared, now reclaimed by creeping growth. The blackened stumps of felled trees jutted like gravestones, half hidden by the forest's slow revenge. Whatever fire of ambition had once burned in him for the land had long since died, leaving only cold ashes and a life of solitude. The cabin was small, rough, and lonely, its chimney built of sticks, its roof sagging under warped clapboards held down by heavy poles, its cracks stuffed with hardened clay. It had but a single door, and opposite it, a window. Yet that window was forever sealed with boards. No one alive could recall a time when it had stood open. No one knew why. It was not for lack of sunlight, for on rare days when hunters passed through that desolate clearing, they sometimes glimpsed the old recluse sitting on his doorstep, soaking in the warmth of the sun as though it were his only companion. But the boarded window held a secret. Few living souls ever knew it. I am one of them, and you shall soon understand. The man's name was Murlock. To the eye, he seemed 70, though in truth he was scarcely 50. Time alone had not carved such ruin into his face. His hair and beard were white as snow, his eyes dull and sunken, his skin furrowed with deep, intersecting lines as though 2 lifetimes of sorrow had been etched upon him. Tall, gaunt, and stooped, he bore himself like one crushed beneath an invisible weight. I never saw him with my own eyes. What I know comes from my grandfather, who lived nearby in those early days, and who told me Murlock's story when I was a boy.
One day, they found Murlock dead in his cabin. There were no coroners then, no newspapers to record the passing of a forgotten man. People simply agreed he had died of natural causes, and that was the end of it. His body was laid to rest beside the grave of his wife, a woman so long gone that even her memory had faded from local tradition. And so, the final chapter of his life seemed closed. Yet the cabin did not rest easy. Years later, as a boy, I dared to creep near its ruins with a companion as reckless as myself. We hurled a stone against its rotting walls and fled in terror, certain the ghost that every child in the county whispered about would rise to chase us. But Murlock's story does not begin with his death. There is an earlier chapter, one my grandfather told me. When Murlock first built his cabin, he was young, strong, and filled with hope. With his rifle for survival and his axe for carving a farm from the wilderness, he faced the frontier with courage. At his side was his wife, a woman of rare devotion, who bore the hardships of that harsh life with a willing spirit and a light heart. Her name is lost to history. Of her beauty and her mind, tradition is silent, but of her worth there can be no doubt. For every day of Murlock's long, widowed life bore witness to the strength of their bond. What else but the memory of such love could have chained a restless pioneer to that lonely, haunted place?
One evening, Murlock returned from a long hunt deep in the forest to find his wife stricken with fever, her body trembling, her mind lost in delirium. There was no doctor within miles, no neighbor to call upon, and she was far too weak to be left alone. So he stayed by her side, tending her as best he could. For 3 long days he fought against the sickness, but on the 3rd night she slipped into silence, her breath shallow, her eyes closed, and she never returned. To Murlock, it seemed she had passed beyond recall. Convinced she was gone, he turned to the grim duty of preparing her for burial. Yet his hands betrayed him. He fumbled with the simplest tasks, repeating some again and again, while failing at others altogether. Each mistake startled him, as though the very laws of nature had turned against him. What unsettled him most was the absence of tears. He felt no sobs rising, no flood of grief, only a strange hollow stillness. Ashamed, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow I will build her coffin. Tomorrow I will dig her grave. Then I will feel her absence, when she is no longer here before me. But now she is dead, of course. It must be all right. Somehow, it must be all right. Things cannot be as terrible as they seem." He stood over her in the fading light, smoothing her hair, arranging her still form with a kind of mechanical care. His hands moved, but his soul was absent. Somewhere deep within, a strange conviction lingered that this was not the end, that somehow she would return and all would be explained. Murlock had never known grief before. His heart was too small a vessel to contain it, his imagination too narrow to grasp its weight. He did not yet realize how deeply he had been struck. That knowledge would come later and never leave him. Grief is a cruel musician, playing its dirges on every soul in a different key. To some, it comes sharp and piercing, like the sting of an arrow. To others, it falls heavy and numbing, like the crushing blow of a club. For Murlock, it was the latter. When his solemn task was done, he sank into a chair beside the table where her body lay. In the deepening gloom, her pale profile glowed ghost-like. He folded his arms upon the table's edge, lowered his face into them, and sat there, tearless, exhausted, utterly broken. Then it came. Through the open window drifted a long, wailing cry, thin and mournful, like a lost child calling from the depths of the darkening forest. Murlock did not stir. Again it came, closer this time, sharper, unearthly. Perhaps it was a beast, perhaps only a dream. But Murlock never knew, for he had already slipped into sleep.
Hours later, the weary watcher stirred. Murlock lifted his head from his arms, though he could not say why. The cabin was drowned in blackness, the body still beside him, or so he believed. He listened, every nerve straining, his breath caught, his blood frozen in its course, as though silence itself demanded his obedience. What had woken him? Who or what was there?
Suddenly, the table beneath his arms trembled. At the same instant, he thought he heard it. A step. Soft. Bare. Another. The sound of naked feet moving across the floor. Terror seized him, choking his voice, paralyzing his limbs. He could not cry out. He could not move. He could only wait through endless seconds that stretched into centuries of dread. He tried to whisper her name, to reach across the table and touch her still form, but his throat was locked, his arms heavy as stone. Then it came. A violent crash shook the cabin. Something heavy had been hurled against the table, driving it hard into his chest, nearly toppling him. At the same instant, a body struck the floor with such force that the whole house quaked. A struggle followed, thrashing, scuffling, a chaos of sounds no human tongue could describe. Murloc staggered to his feet, his mind shattered by fear. He flung his hands upon the table. It was empty. There comes a point when terror tips into madness, and madness demands action. Without thought, without aim, Murloc leapt to the wall, seized his rifle, and fired blindly into the dark. For an instant, the cabin blazed with light, and in that flash he saw it, an enormous panther, its fangs buried in his wife's throat, dragging her lifeless body toward the boarded window. Then the light was gone. Darkness fell heavier than before. Silence swallowed the room. When Murloc awoke, the sun was already high, and the forest outside rang with the songs of birds. The body lay crumpled near the window, abandoned where the beast had dropped it in terror of the gunshot. Her clothing was torn, her long hair tangled, her limbs twisted unnaturally. From her throat, savagely torn, a dark pool of blood had spread, still wet, not yet clotted. The ribbon he had tied around her wrists was snapped. Her hands were clenched tight as if in desperate struggle, and between her teeth, caught fast, was a fragment of the panther's ear.
And thus, the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more.